This is CBC Here and Now.
Alcock was keen to compete for the £10,000 sterling prize offered by a British newspaper for the first non-stop flight between North America and Europe.
As you can tell, our sophistication is much more advanced than what Alcock and Brown and their challenges that they had 100 years ago.
And it's really interesting, and I'm really proud and excited to be on this flight.
A commemorative flight today to mark a crash landing in Clifton and a harrowing first transatlantic flight. And it all started here in St. John's 100 years ago today. Good evening, I'm Debbie Cooper, and there's my co-host, Anthony Germain, at the St. John's Convention Center tonight. Looking very dapper there, Anthony.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm celebrating your retirement a week early, if you don't mind. Actually, the reason we're here at the St. John's Convention Center, as Debbie mentioned, a big day in Newfoundland and Labrador history, actually in world aviation history, celebrating a century since Alcock and Brown took off from that memorable field and landed in Ireland. Now, it's important to sort of take a look back, and who better to do that than our ace reporter, Chris O'Neill-Yates.
When I flew the Atlantic, my most difficult choice was chicken or beef.
The feat Englishmen John Alcock and Arthur Brown accomplished 100 years ago is not lost on retired commercial pilot Dave Padden.
What they did was amazing. They never saw the ocean, hardly at all.
It started in this field owned by a local farmer and businessman. Newfoundland was the closest point to Europe, but it didn't yet have an airfield. One had to be made. What's the significance of this place where we're standing?
This is approximately where Alcock and Brown began the takeoff run in their Vickers Vimy biplane to make the non-stop flight across the Atlantic.
Gary Hebert is an aviation history buff. And this street that we're looking at right now was essentially the runway, part of the runway for Alcock and Brown.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of the images, they look quite relaxed for what they had ahead of them.
This museum lucked into some extraordinary pictures of Alcock and Brown from a private collection. Candid shots taken by a St. John's woman who befriended them.
That is Alcock and Brown having a picnic with the Vimy in the back.
But getting airborne was no picnic. Locals were hired to clear the field so Alcock and Brown could take off in their Vimy Vickers.
They removed boulders, they removed fences, they removed stone walls where necessary, tried to make it as smooth as possible.
The plane, assembled from wood, canvas, and wire, encountered wind, rain, ice, everything the North Atlantic could throw at it.
They were in cloud for about 16 hours, and Alcock had to maintain control by reference to some very primitive instruments the whole time.
An awful lot of people said, it's not going to work, you're going to die, you're going to go missing in the ocean and you'll never be seen again.
But they made it, landing in an Irish bog just 10 miles from where they'd planned to land, beating out 3 other crews, also competing for the £10,000 Daily Mail prize for the first plane to make it across the Atlantic without stopping. It secured Alcock and Brown's place in history.
The fact that you can get on an airliner today and fly basically anywhere in the world is because these guys did it first.
Chris O'Neill-Yates, CBC News, St. John's.
It's such a story of guts and determination and bravery. If you think about taking off back then. Now, yesterday we sent Ashley up in a helicopter. Today was Zach Gowdy's turn. They tried to recreate this flight as much as possible. Of course, they didn't have a biplane, but the spirit of Alcock and Brown, that was certainly present today. So, Zach, how did this thing get off the ground?
Well, you think about what we're celebrating here today. This is an anniversary of a famous flight. And while all the balls and exhibitions are wonderful, to do justice to this day, you really need to get a plane in the air, right? Mm-hmm. And so, Aviation History, Newfoundland and Labrador, who are putting off this event tonight, they work with Provincial Airlines on a commemorative flight that would retrace the flight path of Alcock and Brown. So, of course, it took off from the St. John's Airport, but then flew low over the city, low over what is now Black Marsh Road, but in 1919 was known as Lester's Field. There gained altitude, out through the Narrows and on a course for Ireland.
Right now, obviously, you didn't go to Ireland because CBC has some budgetary constraints, and you wouldn't have made it to our deadline.
Yeah, we had to get back in time for this show tonight. But we still did manage to capture the spirit of Alcock and Brown. Even though you're in a modern airplane, they had historical narratives, recitations, they had an actor in period costume, and when you looked out the window as you flew through the Narrows, you could really appreciate what these two people did. Here's what it felt like.
This is going to be a reenactment, as near as we can make it in modern times, of the Alcock and Brown takeoff from St. John's 100 years ago today. We're going to take off from St. John's International Airport as opposed to Black Marsh Road, and we're going to fly the same route that Alcock and Brown flew as they gained altitude, stabilized their speed. They headed out, down over the harbor, out through the Narrows, and on into history.
Breaking news. Stop. The 1919 air race to cross the Atlantic has begun. The globe watches the goings-on in Newfoundland.
Preparation for takeoff. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. Cabin baggage is stowed. Your table, tray, and seat back ready. Operate and locked position. Thank you.
Once off the ground, the plane disappeared from view as it flew through a valley, slowly but steadily gaining altitude and speed. A newspaper reporter described what happened next. Alcock pointed the plane's nose toward the harbor, and as they overflew it, the ships below sounded whistles and foghorns in a final salute. About 15 minutes later, at 1:57 local time, they crossed the coast and were truly Europe and history bound.
Quite an honor, to be honest with you, to be able to do something so historic. As you can tell, our sophistication is much more advanced than what Alcock and Brown and their challenges that they had 100 years ago. And really, we look at those as pioneers in their field, and what they did is pave the way for transatlantic flight and make air travel really what it is today for everybody.
I wanted to be a pilot ever since I was little. I really thought that flying was really nice, and so I joined Air Cadets, and I want to be a pilot when I get older.
And what does it mean for you to be here today on this historic flight?
I'm really happy. I didn't know anything about it. I was looking at it like about a week ago, and I was looking all about it, and it's really interesting, and I'm really proud and excited to be on this flight.
These sky pilots have reminded us what it means to be alive, but most importantly, they have shown us what it means to truly live.
It's interesting, Zach, that that tradition of clapping when you land.
Is that done anywhere else? Or do people only do it when they land in Newfoundland and Labrador? I don't know. But it's funny that on this day, 100 years ago, in that narrative that Gary Hebard relayed, he said that people burst into applause when this plane got off the ground, and I just think it's wonderful that what was celebrated then is still being celebrated here tonight.
All right, we'll celebrate with you.
Cheers,
Thank
Anthony.
you very much.
My pleasure.
That's Zach Gowdy. Now stay tuned. We've got more coverage coming up later on Here and Now with some very interesting guests. We'll look at the history and also meet Newfoundland's candidate as an astronaut at NASA and talk about how flight 100 years ago links to travel in space. That's coming up. First, though, here's Ashley with your weather.
Yeah, what an exciting day today, and it's really nice that they had some nice weather for that flight this morning. We did see some fog offshore, but overall those temperatures quite nice, climbing to 10 degrees earlier today. Along the northeast coast, again, those single-digit temperatures thanks to that low that's still spinning offshore, and then double digits as we head towards Stephenville, and then Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and Lab City also sitting in those double-digit temperatures. So here's that low that I was talking about. You can see all of that fog. And then the next system that is moving in, bringing that cloud cover across the island and then up through Labrador as well. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, you can see our next weather maker spinning just west of us right now. That's going to be our weather maker as we head towards the weekend. It looks a little bit unsettled, but I'll have all those details coming up.
Thanks, Ashley. The The Crown and defense agree. Graham Vitch should not be held criminally responsible for killing David Collins in 2016, but it will be up to a Supreme Court justice to decide the 21-year-old's fate. The two sides made their closing submissions in the second-degree murder trial today. CBC's Bailey White has more.
Defense lawyer Mark Gruchy says there is only one way to explain the explosion of violence that erupted from Graham Vitch 2.5 years ago. He was delusional, suffering from untreated schizophrenia, and resolute in his belief that his mother's partner, David Collins, was a serious threat to the entire Vitch family. That is why he bludgeoned Collins to death in their shared Logie Bay home. 2 forensic psychiatrists confirmed Vitch's diagnosis, and Gruchy said the circumstances of the killing are obvious. No contradictory evidence was presented, no ulterior motives. Even the Crown agrees Vitch's delusion caused him to believe killing Collins was both necessary and justified. Justice Sandra Chater said today she'll take a few weeks to review the evidence. She said hardly any of it is contentious, but there is a lot to go through. And so Graham Vitch was handcuffed and sent back to Her Majesty's Penitentiary, which is where he's been for most of the time he's been in custody. Chater will have a decision on July 4th. Bailey White, CBC News, St. John's.
The chief of the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary is not ruling out police body cameras for the force. Joe Boland's comments come in the wake of a CBC News investigation into the conduct of 3 officers. Dennis and Zachary Ball were arrested by members of the RNC in 2017. They believe they would have been falsely prosecuted had surveillance video not shown their side of the story. Chief Boland says the force is in support of cameras and has been in discussions with suppliers, but challenges remain surrounding cost, accuracy, privacy, and storage capacity. The Ball family lawyer sees body cameras as a win-win.
So I think a video is a great idea, and perhaps some police officers are asking for videos because it would tell the story from their perspective as well.
Ed Martin, the former head of Nowcor, faced another day of questioning at the Muskrat Falls inquiry today. He faced an interesting question from inquiry lawyer Jeff Budden, who represents the Muskrat Falls Concerned Citizens Coalition. Budden asked Martin whether it was a mistake to hire Astaldi, the main project contractor. Here's part of Martin's response.
No.
No, so you would do that again, even knowing what came after that?
Knowing the processes that were followed and what happened and the analysis, I think the analysis was sound and, we did the right thing at the time.
Okay. And do you believe that Astaldi was the right contract in the sense that Astaldi has delivered on that contract as well or better than the other contenders did?
No, I do not believe that.
Okay. How was that missed? Or could it have been picked up? Obviously, there's a selection process. So if you now believe that they were not the right choice, why do you believe that, and what could have been done to head off this wrong choice?
I think all of the elements, that should have been reviewed were reviewed. I mean, obviously the cost, the experience of Astaldi. I remember being informed that we had our own people on site at some of their other sites. I was informed they had northern experience. They were well known internationally. They had been on some jobs that were looked at that actually had started slow, but they recovered. Their financial wherewithal was in line with other contractors. Their bid, and they had good processes and procedures. We had tested that at other sites. The project team informed me. We went through all of this, and their bid was, better. And at the time, it would be all the testing that was done and all the work that was done. I think it would be much more difficult at the time to explain why we took a bid that was hundreds of millions of dollars more than that. You know, because the depth of analysis at the time, it was what it was. They didn't, you know, they didn't perform in many areas, and they had their financial situation issues, which we had checked. It was fine. We couldn't anticipate that because we'd done the right processes and procedures. It's that kind of thinking that, you know, I go back and think of the processes that were followed. I'm comfortable with that.
Here Now's Terry Roberts has been at the inquiry this week, and he'll join me in studio a little later to talk about Ed Martin's testimony. Well, from St. John's to Victoria, from Nunavut to southern Ontario, bleary-eyed Canadians are proudly wearing the Raptors gear today after last night's historic win.
We the North! We the North! Finally, 24 years waiting!
People lined up around the block to get a piece of that history. In this case, Raptors championship merchandise. Toronto was the underdog at the start of the NBA Finals, but the North dethroned the Golden State Warriors in Game 6, a first for Canada. On Monday, the country gets to celebrate again. A victory parade is planned for Toronto. An unusual vessel flying what looks like a pirate's flag is tied up in St. John's Harbour. The MV Bridget Bardot arrived overnight. It's manned by the controversial Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. The crew's plan was to fuel up and leave, but they've been forced to stay longer to repair a damaged generator. The animal rights vessel is headed to Iceland on a campaign to monitor the minke whale hunt. The ship is named after French movie star and animal rights activist. Bardot was in Newfoundland with the International Fund for Animal Welfare to protest the seal hunt in 1977.
Your plans at the ice?
My plans?
Yes.
To save baby seals.
Yes.
That's all.
Recently I had a gentleman who was trying to pull in a large sea trout. As he was leaning back on his rods, the fly came out of the fish's mouth and then hooked him in the cheek.
Call him Dr. Hook. With the recreational fishery around the corner, he's standing by with a pair of pliers. Welcome back, everyone. Ashley, what a great day it was to be flying over St. John's today on this historic day.
Yes, beautiful sunshine for most of the day. It was a little bit deceiving, though, as far as those temperatures go. Tried to go out a little bit at lunch, and the wind and cooler temperatures. It wasn't so nice.
I had to put on a winter vest, I must say. It was chilly, but it was bright.
Yep.
And like I said, nice for, you know, to be able to see.
And the winds died down. Yeah, and the winds died down too. Yeah, it was nice. Temperatures, though, like I said, in the double digits, about 10 degrees. If you take a look at those, and then heading towards central in the teens through the afternoon today. And then same thing up through Labrador. The coast a little cooler though. Nain sitting at 3 degrees. Still sitting there as well. Temperatures have dropped in St. John's down to 4 degrees as we speak. And then it's still quite mild in Corner Brook, sitting at 17 degrees right now. So if we take a look at the satellite and radar, mentioned yesterday that there were 2 systems in play that we're going to bring in some cloud cover. We're starting to see that high cirrus make its way in, and it's going to continue to cloud over as we head through the night tonight. With that low still offshore, which means fog, it looks like will develop overnight tonight, with a few patchy clearing skies as well in the mix there. But that rain will move in overnight, going to spread across the Labrador, the Big Land, and then eventually going to see some showers move in for the island as well towards the early morning hours. Those temperatures are going to be dipping down to about 3 degrees for Gander. St. John's, well, we're already at 4 degrees, so likely similar temperatures overnight tonight. Those light winds. Corner Brook sitting at 10 degrees overnight tonight with that chance of showers moving in, and then same for Port aux Basques. There is a wreck house wind warning in place anywhere along the west coast, really looking at gusts between 40 to 60 kilometers per hour. The wreck house area, that will be upwards of about 100 kilometers per hour, but that will ease by the time tomorrow morning rolls around. 8 degrees in Lab City overnight tonight with that chance of showers moving in again. Those southeasterlies 20 to 40 kilometers per hour rather. And then 7 degrees for Happy Valley Goose Bay, a little cooler along the coast with those easterlies near 20 kilometers per hour. So here's that rain. Essentially, the weekend does look pretty unsettled. We'll start to see that rain continue to track across the island through the day tomorrow, and then unsettled up through Labrador as well. And then continue to see that rain through the overnight with that second round moving in for Lab City. So here's what we're thinking as far as accumulations go for rainfall. The heaviest will be for Lab City. That's already including that next round of rain that's going to move in. Somewhere between 20 to maybe 40 millimeters of rain by the time that's all said and done. Otherwise, the south coast through the interior looking at 10 to 20 mils. And then a little less along the coast. This will likely just be drizzle, with a chance of a few flurries, showers rather, and same for the Avalon as well. So here's a look at your temperatures. Cooler tomorrow, only reaching the single digits for St. John's, 9 degrees, 7 in Marystown, reaching the double digits for Clarenville, same for Grand Falls, Windsor. Gander should sit around 15 degrees tomorrow, those cooler temperatures along the south coast in the single digits, and then between 10 and 12 degrees along the west coast as well, with those winds out of the southeast. Southeasterlies for St. Anthony as well, 6 degrees. Cartwright should reach a high near 12 degrees. And then we're looking at similar temperatures around Happy Valley Goose Bay towards Lab City in the teens, with those south winds between 15 to 20 kilometers per hour. So that's a look at your forecast. We'll look at Sunday and into next week when I come back.
Thanks, Ashley. With the recreational cod fishery just 2 weeks away, many are eager to get out on the water. But with all the excitement of hauling in a cod, there is a chance one of the hooks meant to catch your dinner may catch a finger instead. Luckily, there's a doctor in Carbonear who knows just what to do. CBC's Todd O'Brien spoke with him.
Summer days and the living is easy. By the hundreds, by the thousands, people in Newfoundland and Labrador will take to the water to catch some fresh cod. But with the fun might come some pain. Turns out, over a 3-year period, more than half of all reported fishhook injuries at Eastern Health happened during the recreational groundfish food fishery. There were so many, Dr. Christopher Patey decided to have a look through Eastern Health's records, 165 patient files.
As soon as this food fishery came around, clinically anyway, in the front line, we're saying, wow, like, they just keep coming in. And what we found is an interesting mix of patients. There's kids that show up, there's 90-year-olds that show up, and then there's everyone in between that as well.
His findings were published in the Canadian Journal of Rural Medicine. Here's how it breaks down. Most fishhooks end up in fingers or thumbs. Most injuries happen to males. The average age, 51 years old.
Because this food fishery becomes such a social dynamic in our culture, that everyone goes out on the boat now instead of just a commercial fisherman who's used to handling the tackle and the gear. You're actually having families going out, and with families and a number of these feathered hooks flying around, then you're getting these hooks getting caught.
Patey looked at the methods doctors and nurses use to remove fish hooks. His favorite, though not well used, is the string yank technique.
So we would actually grab a length of line, and we often look about 12, 18 inches loop. Really, that's just durable. And you actually put it over the hook. You put your finger on the eye of the hook, and then on the count of 3, you just say pull, and you pull. And it flicks it across the room.
And they're like, wow.
It's a technique that came in handy recently.
I had a gentleman who was trying to pull in a large sea trout. As he was leaning back on his rods, the fly came out of the fish's mouth and then hooked him in the cheek. I said to him, I can freeze this and we can push it and cut it, or I can just flick it out.
And while the thought of removing a fish hook might make you squirm,
it's kind of fun for everyone in the department to have something that's unique that happens, and we kind of go and we make it kind of an event when we remove these fish hooks.
Patey expects to be busy this summer with his string yank technique. Todd O'Brien, CBC News, Carbonear.
And you pull.
Well, that's the CLB band in the background there as they start tuning up and playing to entertain the crowd here as we celebrate 100 years since the flight Alcock and Brown. Stay tuned. We're going to talk to somebody about what it was like to get into a biplane, sit in the cockpit, 2 guys with 650 gallons of fuel, more or less, fly to Ireland under difficult conditions. That's coming up.
was a notable week at the Muskrat Falls inquiry, beginning with testimony from a former finance minister and then a former chair of the Nalcor Board of Directors. But it was Ed Martin that most were waiting to hear from, the man considered by many as the architect of the troubled hydro project. So what did he have to say, and did he give the inquiry a better sense of what went wrong? Well, our Terry Roberts was there for it all. He's joining us now to discuss this. Terry, do we have any more answers?
Well, Debbie, I think we have a better understanding now of how our political leaders approved this project, and what I believe is Ed Martin's role in making that happen. Ed Martin was the gatekeeper in every sense of the word. We know that now, and how he controlled the flow of information to Nalcor's board of directors and to his political bosses. That's really become a focal point of the inquiry. So much so that one inquiry lawyer actually suggested that Martin's hiding of valuable information, one document that was so alarming that it may have led to the canceling of the project in 2013 if government had known about it. Here's that moment.
I'm putting to you that you did the wrong thing, that you should have given this information to the government with an explanation if you wanted to provide it, so that the government that was funding this project on behalf of the taxpayers would be in a position to make a decision as to whether they wanted to either cancel this project or reassess the project. And you denied the government the opportunity to do that by your failure to disclose.
So, Terry, did Ed Martin accept any blame for the problems with this project?
Well, I have to say not exactly, but we mentioned that clip we just saw there and how Martin reacted to it. He reacted really the same way he did every time he was challenged on the issue of information disclosure. Okay, he said he only went to government with cost updates when he felt those numbers were reliable. So we had a scenario, for example, Debbie, in the summer of 2013 when Martin's project team gave him a cost update that showed the final forecast cost for the project at $7 billion. Now that's $800 million in what the project was sanctioned at, in late 2012. But now our government never saw this document and says the information wasn't, Martin says that information wasn't, as he puts it, decision ready. So the financing deal went through a few months later, and we all know what happened after that. Billions in cost overruns, of course, and at least a 2-year delay in the schedule. Did
he indicate when he was testifying this week any regret at all, Terry?
Well, in a word, I have to say no. I didn't, not directly anyway. The best way to illustrate that, I would think, would be the Astaldi contract. Now we, and I say that because we're taxpayers, we had to pay nearly twice the original contract to Astaldi. A $1 billion contract turned into nearly a $2 billion contract. And nothing seemed to go right on that project. And eventually, of course, the company went bankrupt, was kicked off the project last year. So just listen to this exchange right here to really get a sense of whether Martin feels accountable for what happened.
In retrospect, knowing what we know now, was hiring Astaldi a mistake?
No.
No, so you would do that again, even knowing what came after that?
Knowing the processes that were followed and what happened and the analysis, I think the analysis was sound, and we did the right thing at the time.
So, a very interesting week, a notable week, as I said in my introduction, and there is more to come from the inquiry. Thanks so much, Terry.
You're welcome, Debbie.
Now, you are looking at a commemorative stamp that I don't think has received any attention during this week of celebration about Alcock and Brown 100 years later. That's a small little version, but just take a look over here now, and you'll see this work of art, which was the inspiration for that stamp, and that was created by Newfoundland artist Grant Boland, who happens to be here at the St. John's Convention Centre, so I'll just invite you over, Grant. So tell me, who's this young fella here?
This is my son, Jack. He's the model. And the reason I took this approach instead of a literal historical representation of the event is to I wanted to focus on, I think, the driving force behind the event, which would, in my mind, is human imagination or like a childlike
Yeah, and your son gets commemorated forever on a stamp. That's pretty cool. How did he react?
He's delighted. He's delighted.
Well, thank you very much and have a good time.
Thank you.
All right, that's Grant Bullen. Now, one of the reasons for the inspiration for this is that apparently after the crash landing in Ireland, there was a young boy who was actually seen playing with a biplane. So that's what the inspiration is. Now, we're going to talk about just what it meant 100 years ago for Alcock and Brown to get into that aircraft and fly from St. John's all the way to Ireland, crossing the Atlantic. I've got Ted Barris with me, a military historian, aviation historian. Thank you very much for joining us.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you. This is a great party.
Well, good. I'm glad you like it. Now, I want you to take here and now viewers and put us in the cockpit and just explain how risky this adventure was for these two men.
Well, first of all, it's never been done before. I mean, this big prize was offered, 10,000 pounds for somebody to cross the Atlantic, and there were a lot of competitors, and it was a scary enterprise because we didn't have the kinds of devices to get us there we do today. It's funny, this morning I got on a plane in Toronto and I'm looking at the little monitor and it says -61 outside. You know, we're at 30,000 feet. Can you imagine what it was like flying in an open cockpit across the Atlantic?
No.
Yeah, exactly. And to do it, not knowing exactly where you're going, I think Alcock was the navigator, and they hit the Irish coast within 10 miles of where they had hoped to. That's a lot of territory to cross, not knowing exactly where you are without the stars, because it was cloudy, it was foggy, it was windy. They were getting blown around in this aircraft, this Vimy aircraft.
Yeah. Vickers, yeah.
Vickers, and so some of it is by gosh and by golly, or what they call dead reckoning, and I don't like the dead part, but very much a great, as you say, risk.
And you also imagine you're flying 16 hours at relatively low altitude, dealing with fog and wind and everything, and
packing as much fuel as you possibly could, not knowing if that was enough or too much.
Yeah.
They stuffed the plane with fuel so that they'd have enough to get there.
And having a very bumpy landing when they got there.
Well, that's kind of a myth.
Is it?
I mean, there was a big story about how they crash landed. They just brought it down a little rough, that's all. I mean, they got there, they found the trees, and they landed sort of a controlled crash.
Controlled crash, the best kind of crash.
Absolutely,
now
the
listen,
ones you survive.
Now listen, you're going to be talking to everybody here tonight. You've written a lot of books. What's the message you're going to have with people tonight?
Well, I'm going to talk about the Dam Busters, which is a very important story from the Second World War. Most people don't realize that there were 30 Canadians, a quarter of the crews who went on that raid in 1943 were Canadians. And there's a wonderful connection because just like the guys in the Dam Busters raid in 1943, Alcock and Brown had war experience. They'd both been shot down. They were Royal Flying Corps flyers, so they were driven to fly. They understood what the purpose of a mission was.
Right.
These guys did. I'll talk about that.
Okay.
And there's that other unknown quotient, which we call invincibility and courage and valor.
Right, and sometimes craziness. Listen, Mr. Barris, appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, we've got more on the celebration of Alcock and Brown 100 years later coming up on Here and Now. Welcome back to Here and Now, live from the St. John's Convention Centre, where the celebration of 100 years of an amazing historical aviation feat is continuing and will go on into the hours of the night now. One person who's known in the St. John's area as a leading real estate agent is an avid flyer. Jim Burton is he's in love with flying, always has been, always will be, and he's one of the major organizers in recognizing the pioneering aspects of what Alcock and Brown managed to do, and we managed to catch up with him in the big land.
So I'm going to get ready, and we'll get you on board, and we'll go for a great flight into the de Havilland Beaver. We're all set.
Okay.
Let's go flying.
They were the first two to ever be able to say, yesterday I was in North America. Think of it, right? Because everybody else came over by boat. But they were the first two. Of course, some 16 hours later, they landed in Clifton, Ireland. And it wasn't without the challenges. That aircraft went inverted twice. They lost their wind-driven generator. A part of the muffler came off. They were, explorers. They were pioneers. They were in discovery mode. It was a time of excitement. But to be the first two, and it happened right here in Newfoundland and Labrador.
The significance of what happened 100 years ago and thinking about pioneering. Well, here's a young person who wants to be a pioneer in space travel. Bethany Downer is this province's candidate in NASA as an astronaut in training. Bethany, maybe you can explain what's the link between what happened 100 years ago today and space travel, which is something you want to do.
Absolutely. Well, when we think about the long-distance space travel that happened now 100 years ago today, this was setting the bar, setting a pioneering step in terms of long-distance travel on Earth. And it was only through these efforts such as this that we could look even higher and even further. So when we consider how far we've come in 100 years, we can't help but think what the next 100 years will bring.
It's amazing when you think of two people getting inside a biplane, two wings made out of fabric, with hundreds of gallons of gasoline, deciding to actually do this at low altitude across to Ireland. When you think about pioneering in space, is it inspirational at all?
To say the least. I mean, that was definitely a daring and pioneering effort, and that's the type of people that are being sought now for the more long-duration spaceflight missions that are going further into our solar system. So I think it's important to consider how far we've come, because that'll only inspire us further for where we'll go.
All right, so tonight, of course, we're looking back at 100 years. You make the really good point that there they are in a biplane crossing over to Ireland. You look at where we are now with an International Space Station, and we had a space shuttle program. What are you hoping to do?
I'm hoping to be the first Newfoundlander to go to space, so this won't be for a few years' time. Of course, it's a work in progress, but I'm enjoying all the steps along the way, currently in the training process and working hard, and hopefully soon, as the commercial and private industry grows even more, I get to be more of a part of it.
Right. And do you have to sort of exhibit some kind of pioneering spirit to do what it is that you're doing?
I honestly think we all have it. I think human nature, we want to explore, we want to go find out more that which we don't know, and space is a great way to exhibit that and to develop it and learn even more.
Because one of the things about the story, and I'll wrap up the interview with this, is Alcock and Brown, is that you're risking your life in doing something like they did. You're thinking of going into space. Doesn't the danger, does it appeal to you, or does it make you nervous?
I think I accepted a long time ago that that's part of the gig, and I'm working on something that's much bigger than myself. So in these efforts, we're looking to advance human capabilities, technology, and scientifically, so it's not just us and what we're trying to do, and we try to keep that in mind.
Well, I hope you are the first Newfoundlander in space, so I can brag to everybody that I talked to you while you were here in St. John's down on Earth.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Bethany, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Here and Now. Ashley's going to tell us about what it's going to look like on Father's Day. That's coming up on Sunday.
Sunday, Father's Day. Well, the good news is it's not going to be a soaker. So if you,
it takes a little to please us.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So if you do have plans to barbecue, it looks like it'll be an okay day for that. We'll take a look at the future tracker. You can see that shower activity moving through Saturday night, and then the next system that's making its way towards Lab City through the afternoon. So that area, especially Western Labrador and then up through Central Labrador, you are going to see periods of rain through the day on Sunday, and then we'll start to see some shower activity move in late day again for at least the west coast as that front makes its way through. It will change to showers more than likely in the afternoon. It does look gray, but we could see a few peaks of sun in the mix there as well. And then temperature-wise, we should see those temperatures bump back up again into the mid to high teens for Central, towards the west coast as well, a little cooler along the south coast. Marystown only reaching a high near 12 degrees, and then 10 it looks like for St. John. Should stay dry with those peaks of sun through the afternoon. St. Anthony, 12 degrees, Cartwright, 15. Nain, still cool in those single-digit temperatures with that chance of showers. And then again, periods of rain for Lab City, 15, and Happy Valley Goose Bay looking at that as well through the afternoon, and 16 degrees. Looking into Monday, the next couple of days really does look unsettled with a number of weak systems moving through. We're looking at that potential for some showers, especially for for the Avalon rather, on Monday afternoon, and again scattered across the island, and then up through Lab City, still looking at that potential for, or at least Labrador anyway, still looking at that potential for showers right through Tuesday. Eventually, things should clear out by Wednesday morning as that low moves offshore. Some clearing skies for the island and parts of Labrador as well. Along the coast, you're still going to hang on to those unsettled conditions into Wednesday. So over the next 5 days, this is what we're looking at. So anywhere from 9 to 10 degrees this weekend for St. John's and eastern Newfoundland, specifically the island. Otherwise, we're looking at teen temperatures and some sun peeking through on Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday looking unsettled between 13 and 16 degrees. Those overnight lows between 8 and 9 degrees. For central Newfoundland, 12 degrees tomorrow. Sunday bumping back up to 18. We should be in the 20-degree range as we head into next week. Again, unsettled, have a mix of sun and cloud with that chance of a few showers. Wednesday looks a little bit gray and showers there as well. For western Newfoundland, 11 degrees tomorrow, then temperatures between 19 and 20 heading into next week. Tuesday and Wednesday in those teens again with that potential for a few showers in the mix there. Eastern Labrador, rainy and gray this weekend. Monday, Tuesday looks like the best where we're going to see some sunshine, 19 degrees, then 17 for your Wednesday. And then for Western Labrador, 16 degrees on Saturday, Sunday 15, and then those teens again into next week. Tuesday, it looks like the best day at 15 degrees.
birthday and anniversary greetings is brought to you by Lane's Retirement Living. With a pool, cinema, and chef-prepared meals, everyone wants in. Reserve your suite today.
Happy 65th wedding anniversary to Desmond and Marion Mallows of Gander. They celebrated on Wednesday. Jean Snow of Grand Falls is 96 today. Happy birthday, Jean. Happy 65th anniversary to Charlie and Alvina Easton of Clarenville, who celebrated on Wednesday. Birthday greetings to Rowena Mercer of Grand Falls, Windsor. She celebrated her 94th birthday on Wednesday as well. Happy 95th birthday to Laura Burry in Paradise, and there she is with her granddaughter.
Happy birthday, Elma Newbury from Lewisport, who turns 90 coming up on Monday. Happy 50th wedding anniversary to Margaret and Paul Dufour, formerly of Labrador City, now living in St. John's. And happy 50th anniversary to James and Regina Harris today. Happy anniversary to Jack and Pearl Stuckless of Point Leamington, who celebrated their 60th anniversary on the 9th. And happy 54th anniversary to Lorne and Bernice Henstrich of Triton.
Happy anniversary to Harold and Mary Hennepin of Botwood, who celebrated 50 years together on the 12th. Happy 55th anniversary to Bob and Francine White from Pasadena. Happy 57th anniversary on the 12th to Harvey and Ruby Norman of Packet. Happy 65th wedding anniversary to Marion and Desmond Mallows from Gander. That was on Wednesday. Happy 91st birthday to Dorothy Malloy of Jean de Bay, who celebrated yesterday.
Nellie Snow of Topsail also celebrated her 91st birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Nellie. Happy 91st birthday to Dorothy O'Keefe, formerly of Jean de Bay, now in Grand Bank. And happy birthday to Barbara White of Gander, who is celebrating her 93rd birthday today. Frank Keats of Buckins Junction is 90 years old as well today. Happy birthday. And happy birthday to Emily Hancock of Fredericton, who is celebrating her 90th birthday tomorrow.
Happy birthday to Tony Doucette from Port-au-Port, who celebrated her 97th birthday yesterday. Agnes and Ron Richard of Gander celebrate 59 happy years together this coming Tuesday. Happy 90th birthday to Louise Snow of Grand Falls, Windsor, whose special day is tomorrow. Happy birthday wishes going out to Elizabeth Wiseman of Clarenville, who celebrated her 90th birthday on the 11th. Congratulations today, Harvey and Eva Hilliard, on their 65th anniversary. They are from Corner Brook, but are now living in St. John's.
Happy 50th wedding anniversary to Claudine and Garfield Roberts, who are celebrating today. Happy 56th anniversary to Henry and Dalla Chaison from Stephenville, who also will celebrate tomorrow. And George and Catherine Marshall of Dunville are celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary today. Happy anniversary to Len and Bernice Parsons of Gander, who celebrated their 68th wedding anniversary on the 11th.
George and Ruby White of Point Leamington, now in Montreal, enjoyed their 56th anniversary on the 8th. Happy 60th anniversary to Bob and Emily Bailey of Southlands, whose anniversary was June 5th. And happy birthday to Frank Doyle of St. John's, who celebrated his 90th birthday on June the 8th.
Well, as you can see here at the St. John's Convention Center, people are slowly moving into the main ballroom for the festivities to mark 100 years since that amazing transatlantic flight. And I just wanted to say, as Here and Now winds down on this Friday, that I'm away next week, but I will definitely be back for Debbie Cooper's grand finale a week from tonight. Hope you'll tune in. I suspect we'll have some surprises. But I did encounter a guest here who has a special message for Debbie, and that is our Finance Minister for our province, Tom Osborne.
Well, Debbie, I've been about 2 decades in politics. People say my face hasn't changed, but I've lost my hair. Cheers, Debbie, you haven't changed a bit.
Thank you.
And cheers
so
to you.
much,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Debbie.
Tight lines to you, Anthony. Send pictures.
Thank you.
See you next week.
I'll try. I'll fake them if I have to. Bye.
Bye now. Oh, that was a nice surprise.
Yes.
And Yeah, that's a wonderful event that they're having down there.
Yes.
And we were talking, I mean, the interviews were great, the guests were great. We were very impressed with Bethany Downer.
Yes.
You know, what a wonderful speaker she is, and I hope she becomes the first
Me
Newfoundlander
too. That'd
in
be amazing.
space.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
It would be pretty sweet.
Now, we have to look at a picture.
Weather picture, yeah. We're going to look at, like we do at the end of the show every day. Earlier this week, we were talking about how gorgeous the sunsets were in the Big Land. And this was another one there in Churchill Falls. It was sent in to us. Beautiful shot there, hey?
It's excellent, yeah.
I just love the colors of the sky, and it's reflecting in the water. Ross Foley, yeah.
You can't see where the sky ends and the water begins, or vice versa.
Yeah, beautiful shot there. Sunsets in the Big Land are pretty spectacular, and we thank you for sharing them with us. And if you have any weather photos that you'd like to share with us, send them to nlphotos@cbc.ca, and we'll get them on the show, hopefully.
Well, it's been quite the week, and you are still talking about your flight yesterday.
Sure
amazing, wasn't it?
It was amazing, yeah. It was hard to do the weather from in the studio today, but something I'll never forget for sure.
Glad that we could share it with you.
Yes.
That's our program for this week. Have a wonderful weekend. See you next week, and Carolyn Stokes will be with me.
Have a good weekend.